I read online this week from one of the Methodist communications that a study out of Rochester, New York, has kind of blown away what they previously thought about people's attention spans. That usually we had us geared that we could hold our attention for a certain amount of time. It's down to 6 minutes. That doesn't give me much time. But if your mind starts to wander, I'm not so sure that's a bad thing either, because what's going to happen is, that you're going to catch a word here or a phrase there, and it's going to take you to some place. And sometimes that's where you need to go. There are times that that's exactly the place that you go. Now, if you're thinking about fishing on the lake someplace, that's a little bit different now. You need to pay attention right here. It's all right. The speed at which we do things anymore is just absolutely incredible. And see, this is exactly what happens, that I'm thinking about my sermon, and I'm making my notes as to what these points are that I want to get across. And as soon as I said that, I'm reminded, I forgot to tell you to go to the Methodist website, our church website, and hit a drop-down box for the youth and see what's there. That was supposed to be part of the announcement, but that didn't make it in there. But Sherry's put a lot of time in it, and there's some things, information about the youth that you ought to know what's going on. So it's part of your being prepared. I'm going to use the same illustration. I've used this one before, and I'm going to use it again because nothing else fits as good. When I get a better one, I'll use it instead. But it has to do with the idea of orientation and disorientation. And orientation is the way that we navigate the world. Our orientation is what keeps us upright and square and moving towards a particular set of values or goals or wherever it is. If we're oriented towards the big picture or Christ, then we are oriented in a way, we turn that direction, and we kind of know what steps we need to take to keep us on this path and keep us going this way. Disorientation is just the opposite of that. Somewhere along the line, becoming disoriented has a pretty negative connotation with us today, because, when we think about people that are disoriented, the first person that comes to mind is someone that is suffering from dementia or something like that. It's very serious. And when they become disoriented, we feel like we have to watch them all the time, and, things are changing in their mind, and things just aren't quite right. And disorientation can occur to you when you still have all your faculties. And that's more the point today. We can recognize it in somebody else when we see it, in somebody that we know very close and personal, but our own disorientation, sometimes we don't see it in ourselves. And the illustration that I used before, it had to do with flying an airplane, and the disorientation has happened to me. It didn't happen tragically like it did to John Kennedy Jr., who took off, remember, in 1999, and headed towards Martha's Vineyard, and he had his wife, and he had his wife's sister with him, and all three of them tragically were killed because he became disoriented. He wasn't a pilot for that long. He's flying a very powerful airplane. It's at night, and he flies across open water. He loses the horizon, and the results are almost predictable. Very predictable. When you can't see something that orients us, it's easy to not know where you are. And flying a plane is really bad, too, because, after you get to where you're doing this for a long time, then everything in your head is moving the same speed of what the airplane is, which means it changes in pitch or attitude. You don't pick them up. And so you can actually be upside down and not know it. You could be headed towards the ground and not know it. You could be left or right. You don't know. And that's why they put this marvelous instrument in your airplane called a directional gyro. And it keeps you headed the right direction if you pay attention to it. If you're expecting a sermon that's focused on the Sermon on the Mount, I'm not going to do that this morning. I'm going to save that to when I can really, really do it justice. We talked about it in our lectionary Bible study, and we talked about the rest of the scriptures as well, the Corinthian text, and from there it's kind of like dealing out cards, and I just kind of picked one. Okay, this one's going to work for me this week. But I was thinking about this long before I read it, because it goes to what happens to people in life. And it goes to what happens as we live out our life and try to stay connected and try to do all the right stuff, but we just find ourselves that we're no longer on the same path that we were on before, a path that felt so good, yielded good results, but somehow we just found ourselves, we didn't stay on it for whatever reason, and we don't even know sometimes what the reason is. Paul is talking in Corinthians to a church that, like I said, that church that he loves. And the texts that surround this passage in Corinthians do something about, the Micah text, the Beatitudes, even the Psalm, that if you could just imagine that all these are shining a light back to the Corinthians text and asking basically the same question that was asked in Micah. That if you read about halfway down there, you heard her say something to the effect, is God saying through Micah's lips, "O my children," or "O Israel, what have I done to you? What have I done to you to make you do to me what you're doing? Wasn't your life pretty good? And how did you get off of this path and get to where you are right now when I was doing so much good stuff for you?" And again, the psalmist asked the question, who can live in your tent? Because they thought that the standards were way too high for what God wanted. And Jesus is telling us in the Sermon on the Mount, this reorientation, there's that word, this reorientation as to what you think you know in the world, because you've led with your brain instead of your heart. And so he's saying that you think one way, but I'm telling you, blessed, happy, whatever you want to use in the word in there. Happy are the pure in heart. Happy are the poor in spirit, the meek, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who are persecuted for my sake. A different set of fundamental values that we need to walk towards. And Paul's saying, and the reason is because you're leading with your brain and you're not using your heart. So Paul's trying to rein in this church that he loves so much, that he established. And we talked last week about the dissensions in the church and the fact that they weren't unified. And I follow Cephas, and I follow Paul, and I follow Apollos, and I follow Christ. And that was the disunity that was there. And part of the disunity was there is because they had given up on one fundamental aspect of God that they hadn't thought about. That God is revelation. That of all the natures of God, God is love, God is creator, God is all these things. But of all the things that God does to get us to follow him is he reveals himself to him. And no greater revelation took place than the cross. And all we have to do is look through history, and we can look through the burning bush, and we can look through the flood, and we can look through God speaking through all the ways it does. But there is nothing more powerful about God's love for us than right there. And he's saying that you've got away from this. You somehow think that you can learn your way into this place that you want to go. You can orient yourself on something, your own abilities, rather than what's been done for you. Your thinking is wrong. There's a fundamental problem with the way you think. The problem is that you think that you can learn yourself next to God, and you simply can't. And Paul makes it quite clear by quoting the prophet Isaiah early on. It says, God in his wisdom decided wisdom wasn't going to be the way that you were going to come to know him. We think that we have this ability to package up our religion or package up the way that we think about God in such a way as to we can make God conform to the way we want God to be. We get in real trouble then. Real trouble. The church in Corinth was no different than the church that sits here in Mesquite, Nevada today. And the reason we know this is because of what Paul tells us about the church. They were enriched in Christ. They were enriched in knowledge and speech. They had every spiritual gift. And we can look around this place and we can see this. We have the same thing. We have great leaders, great speakers, people who know the Bible forwards and backwards, and people who are good at speaking. I'll get there. But we've got it. See? We're no different than the church in Corinth. And Paul is pointing out exactly what the orientation is of that church. And it says, do not fall into that trap. Do not rely on your own abilities to think that because you are enriched in Christ. And after he tells them they're enriched in Christ, he calls them spiritual babies. Got to feed them milk. And that's coming in a week or so. But as much as they have, on all that they possess, and everything that they rely upon, Paul says you have a fundamental problem with the way you've oriented yourself and the way that you think. So we need to pay attention right there. We're like them, but we don't want to be like them. I didn't read this. I listened to this, because this was really good. I want to tell you this story. I was going home from church, and I turned on NPR, because my wife had it set to that station. That's the only reason I turned it on. Turned the radio on, NPR is on. But it was really interesting about what was going on right then. They were talking about Amazon, and Amazon's new program that they've come out with. And I think that we've heard this, a lot of us have heard this already, the thought of it, and I certainly did when I was in school, but this idea of artificial intelligence. You know what I'm talking about? It's part that it's built into your smartphones and everything else, so that your phone actually tries to anticipate what it is that you really want it to do. And so it spells words for you, and then you say, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted to say. But it's trying to learn you. And it tries to learn you and anticipate you. Well, Amazon's taking this to a new level. Because Amazon, the number one supplier of the world's goods now, when we order stuff, we order from Amazon. Amazon says that we want to be able to ship your order before you order it. Yes. How's that for smart? You didn't even know you wanted it, and they've already shipped it. And they say this is possible. This is possible because the artificial intelligence that is built into the Amazon tracking knows that you bought this, and you bought this, and you bought this, and you bought this, and you bought it this day, this day, this day, this day, and they can follow this line and just about predict what you're going to buy next. That's pretty smart, isn't it? Right now, you got a little bitty helicopter flying around with boxes on them. Got your name on it. You didn't even know you ordered it. It's not that bad yet, but it could be going. But it's the idea of this learning and basing what you know on intelligence. And God is saying, that that may be good for Amazon, but that's not good for the way that you want to know me. If you want to know me, you're going to have to open up your heart. There's a reason we sing this the song says, open the eyes of my heart, Lord. I want to see you, because without looking through the eyes of our heart, we will never see God. We cannot use the intelligence. God says you won't learn me. Not through wisdom. You will learn me through your heart. So, even though we're gifted in speech and all knowledge of Christ, and we're gifted in the spiritual gifts, that's great. That's great. But we have to take this knowledge and all that we do and apply it somehow. And we can't do this with our brains. We have to do this with our ministries, have to be responsible in response to the leanings of our heart. This revelation idea goes even further. We can't talk about it enough. So the folly and foolishness of the cross, the stumbling block to the the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. And when we try to explain this to somebody else, that we try to explain it with our brains. And we usually start off, well, about 2,000 years ago. It's not that. We should know what we're talking about and explain Christ and the cross with our heart, what it does for us, what it means for us, how we apply it to our lives. What does it mean for the church in Mesquite, Nevada? See, these are more interesting questions than this mind thing of being able to teach about things. That's not a bad thing. We do need a certain base of knowledge. But if we base everything on our knowledge, we've got the same problem that John Kennedy had. And with probably the same tragic results, because we will be spiritually dead. And a church that's spiritually dead is not going very far. Not very far at all. But fortunately, that God has prepared us in a certain way. That even though that He knows that God knows that it's not going to be through wisdom, it's going to be through the heart. He has given us a heart that has the ability to see the directional gyro that He has built into each one of us. Think of that. We know the way. It's inside us. Your faith has created the opportunity for you to see the cross with clear eyes. And those who can see this cross are not perishing. They're not perishing as the world perished. But the cross itself, and this is the essence of the lesson today, the cross itself is the power of God. That's what we're not tapping into. We talked last week about this idea to see every issue through the lens of this cross. And now we need to hold up this cross even higher and expand it and take it away from our mind that we see it. So the issues are not looked at, whatever they are, whatever the issues are not looked at with our brains, but looked at with our heart. What does our heart tell us about things? Because that'll take us a lot further. A whole lot further. So as we listen to the message of Paul to the Corinthians, about unity, about lifting high the cross, and about not relying on your own self, your own mental abilities, but look at the way that He's equipped you to look at God through the eyes of your heart, then, that's the power of God. Then you have something to boast about. Now boast. Because what will come forth from your mouth is how great God is. And how the great things that God has done for you. And that's really what evangelism is all about. Thanks be to God.